Welcome to the adventure of the Spectral Voice, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series The Clockwork Conspiracies. Sherlock Holmes and the Age of Innovation, playing in the year 1895. It seems these old Edison cylinders, upon which I endeavored to capture some of my recollections of Holmes, have finally seen the light of day. Recorded during those heady years of the late 19th century, a time brimming with invention, the second industrial revolution, they call it now. London was ablaze with electric lights. The first motor cars sputtered along our streets, and progress seemed unstoppable. Yet, this age of innovation, as I termed it in my notes for the Clockwork Conspiracies, Sherlock Holmes and the Age of Innovation, cast long shadows. Holmes found himself confronting not just the usual human depravity, but crimes twisted by new sciences, mysteries born of the very machines meant to improve our lives. These recordings, I trust, offer a more immediate sense of those strange times. Allow me to commence this series with a case that perfectly illustrates this clash between progress and peril. It concerns a death, a phonograph, and a most unnatural confession, the singular affair I documented as the adventure of the Spectral Voice. Chapter. The November afternoon had drawn in early, casting Baker Street in twilight. Rain lashed the windows, each gust rattling the glass. Within our sitting room, the fire crackled, casting dancing shadows. Holmes had been sunk in one of his profound silences for hours, surrounded by chemical apparatus and the lingering acrid scent of some recent experiment, his brow furrowed in concentration. A sudden, sharp rap upon our door startled me from my perusal of the Strand magazine. It was too firm, too decisive for a casual caller. Moments later, Mrs. Hudson ushered in our visitor. Her familiar footsteps preceded a lighter, quicker tread upon the stair. The figure who entered surprised me. It was a woman, plainly but respectably dressed, carrying herself with an air of quiet, uncommon authority. Mr. Sherlock Holmes. My name is Inspector Hardcastle, Scotland Yard. Forgive the intrusion, but I believe I have a matter that may be of interest to you, answered Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. Her voice was clear and steady, devoid of the deference or nervousness one might expect. Holmes looked up, his keen eyes appraising her swiftly. Inspector, indeed, pray be seated. Watson, draw a chair closer to the fire for the inspector. You have braved foul weather to reach us, stated Sherlock Holmes. She accepted the seat with a brief nod, her gaze direct as she addressed Holmes, wasting no time on pleasantries. Thank you. The matter concerns Mr. Silas Croft, the industrialist. He was found deceased in his study this morning. Kensington Division deems it a suicide. Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle said. Holmes merely raised an eyebrow, indicating polite, if mild, interest. Suicides, unless presenting peculiar features, rarely captured his full attention. The peculiarity, Mr. Holmes, lies not in the means, which was conventional enough laudanum, but in the confession left behind. It was not written, it was recorded upon a phonograph cylinder. At the mention of the phonograph, the languor vanished from Holmes's demeanor. He sat upright, his eyes suddenly bright with intense curiosity. The crackle of the fire seemed the only sound for a moment. A phonograph, you are quite certain? How extraordinary. And the content of this mechanical confession, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. A full admission to extensive embezzlement from his own company funds, delivered in what is unmistakably Mr. Croft's voice. Calm, measured, chillingly so, answered Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. I watched, fascinated. The inspector's methodical presentation was certainly modern, a stark contrast to the often blustering approaches of Lestrade or Gregson. She seemed entirely unfazed by Holmes's sharp scrutiny. Found where precisely, and by whom? Was the machine itself disturbed? The cylinder pristine, explained Sherlock Holmes. Beside the body on his desk, Inspector, discovered by his protege, a Mr. Edgar Finch. The phonograph appeared untouched, the cylinder properly seated. The recording is remarkably clear. Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle said. Holmes steepled his fingers, his gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window, though I knew his mind was leagues away, grappling with this new, technological puzzle. Suicide is convenient, Inspector. A confession delivered by machine, doubly so. It avoids the tremor of a dying hand, the potential ambiguity of script. Instead, we have vibrations etched in wax, a voice from beyond the veil, orchestrated perhaps too perfectly. Why bring this to me if the Yard is satisfied? Deduced Sherlock Holmes. Because, Mr. Holmes, my superiors see a simple end to a sordid tale. I hear something else. The perfection troubles me. Furthermore, Croft's recent automation of his factories displaced hundreds. He made enemies, desperate ones. A recorded voice can be manipulated, can it not? Responded Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. A faint smile touched Holmes's lips. The game, as he would say, was afoot. The complexities of the case, blending human motive with the nascent possibilities of technology, had thoroughly captured him. Our invention meets intrigue, a most stimulating problem. Inspector Hardcastle, your instincts serve you well. A voice, captured and potentially counterfeited, a challenge I cannot resist. Watson and I shall call upon the scene of this phantom confession tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock in Kensington, you said. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Precisely. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I felt this required your unique perspective. Until tomorrow, remarked Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. With another curt nod, the inspector departed. Her firm footsteps receded down the stairs, followed by the distinct click of the front door closing against the wind and rain. Holmes remained by the fire, no longer staring at the flames, but through them, already piecing together the first threads of what promised to be a most singular investigation into the spectral voice on the wax cylinder. A short cab ride through the grey afternoon drizzle brought us to the late Mr. Silas Croft's residence in Kensington. Following Inspector Hardcastle's intriguing, if somewhat unorthodox, presentation, its grand facade seemed silent, absorbing the muted clatter of hooves and rumble of wheels from the street. A solemn butler admitted us, his footsteps echoing faintly in the marble hall, leading us towards the master's study. The study was paneled in dark oak, lined with shelves heavy with ledgers and scientific treatises, dominated by a vast mahogany desk. Despite the signs of wealth, a distinct chill hung in the air, untouched by the sullen fire in the grate. Upon the desk, beside scattered papers and an overturned inkwell staining the carpet, stood the object of our interest, the phonograph. A young man rose stiffly from a leather armchair as we entered. He was pale and elegantly dressed, though his eyes held a strained, watchful quality. This, the butler informed us, was Mr. Edgar Finch, Croft's protege and the discoverer of the body. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for coming. It is a dreadful business, simply dreadful, Mr. Edgar Finch said. Indeed, Mr. Finch. Pray recount the circumstances of your discovery, deduced Sherlock Holmes, as Finch related his grim discovery, finding the door locked, forcing entry, discovering his benefactor, and noting the cylinder. Holmes moved with silent intensity. He briefly examined the covered form by the desk before turning his full attention to the phonograph. It was a handsome machine, brass horn gleaming, the wax cylinder upon its spindle. Holmes leaned closer, peering at the cylinder, then at the mechanism itself. He gestured towards it. This apparatus, Mr. Finch. You are familiar with its workings, Sherlock Holmes responded. Mr. Finch stepped forward. His fingers moved with instinctive familiarity over the horn's mount and intricate gearing, the metal cool beneath his touch. He adjusted a small lever with a faint, practiced click. Yes, Mr. Holmes. Mr. Croft was most enthusiastic about its potential. He even had certain modifications made, improving the clarity, you see. I assisted him with some of the technical adjustments. Mr. Edgar Finch answered. Holmes straightened up, his expression thoughtful. He had not yet requested the cylinder be played, relying, it seemed, on the inspector's initial report. Clarity, you say? Inspector Hardcastle remarked upon the exceptional quality of the recording. Almost. Unnervingly free of the usual imperfections, I understand, observed Sherlock Holmes. He nodded, perhaps a trifle too quickly. Mr. Croft spared no expense in acquiring the latest advancements. He believed clear communication was paramount, even in recorded form, responded Mr. Edgar Finch. Holmes made no immediate reply, pacing slowly towards the window. His gaze drifted over orderly bookshelves before fixing on a small, framed photograph standing slightly askew. It showed Croft with stern-faced men outside a factory. Holmes picked it up, examined it briefly, then replaced it, nudging it back into perfect alignment. "Tell me, Watson," he remarked, his voice cutting through the study's quiet solemnity, punctuated only by the heavy ticking of a mantel clock. "Does anything strike you about the arrangement of this room, supposedly untouched since Mr. Finch forced the door?" Sherlock Holmes said. I surveyed the scene again, the desk, the chair, the faint indentation in the carpet where Croft had fallen, the phonograph standing sentinel. "It seems tragically straightforward, Holmes, a scene of despair," responded Dr. John Watson. "Precisely, almost too straightforward. Observe the overturned inkwell, suggesting haste or struggle. Yet note the precise alignment of the books, the undisturbed dust on nearby ledgers, save one, and the photograph's position before I corrected it. A man composing a final confession via phonograph is unlikely to concern himself with such meticulous tidiness. Small points, Watson, but discordant." He turned back towards Finch, his gaze sharp. Explained Sherlock Holmes. "This factory Mr. Croft owned, the source of his fortune, and it seems his recent anxieties. I believe a visit is in order. To understand the man and his pressures, we must understand his work. Mr. Finch, perhaps you would be so good as to facilitate our visit," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Finch seemed momentarily taken aback, but quickly composed himself. "Of course, Mr. Holmes. Anything to assist the investigation. The factory. It has been the site of much change recently. Automation," Mr. Edgar Finch said. "Automation," Holmes echoed thoughtfully, a new glint in his eye. "Indeed. That may prove most illuminating. We shall proceed there directly, Watson," remarked Sherlock Holmes. As we took our leave, the image of the gleaming phonograph and the protege's too-knowing familiarity with its workings remained fixed in my mind. The echoes of deception, I suspected, were only just beginning to reverberate. The journey eastward took us from the manicured squares of Kensington to the grimy heart of London's industry. Croft's factory loomed before us, a vast brick edifice stained dark by years of soot, its chimneys belching plumes of grey smoke into the already leaden sky. Even from the street, the air thrummed with a low, mechanical pulse, punctuated by the distant hiss of steam and the groan of unseen machinery, a constant reminder of the relentless energy contained within. Inside, the contrast assaulted our senses. One vast hall reverberated with a cacophony of sound, the deafening, rhythmic clang, and were of newly installed automated looms. These mechanical marvels wove cloth with uncanny speed and precision, their tireless arms a blur of motion, unattended by human hands save for a few grim-faced overseers. A sharp, metallic tang hung heavy in the air. Yet adjacent sections stood eerily quiet, the looms cold and silent. Here, huddled groups of men and women stood idle, their faces etched with a mixture of resentment and apprehension. The low murmur of their hushed voices, punctuated only by the shuffle of restless feet or an occasional, dry cough, was a stark counterpoint to the mechanical roar nearby. His voice, though pitched low, possessed a clarity that cut through the background hum. A potent illustration of progress, Watson, and its inevitable casualties, declared Sherlock Holmes. Holmes approached one group, his manner less abrupt than usual, almost conciliatory. A burly fellow with soot-stained hands looked up, his expression wary, the clatter from the next hall seeming to momentarily subside as attention focused. "Forgive the intrusion, gentlemen. We are making inquiries concerning the late Mr. Croft," Sherlock Holmes said. The burly man grunted, his voice rough, like grinding gears. "Late is right. Can't say many here are shedding tears. Look around you, sir. See what his progress brought us. Empty hands and empty bellies," factory worker said. Others murmured agreement, a low growl of shared grievance that seemed to vibrate in the tense air. The silence felt thick with unspoken anger. His interest in automation was sudden, explained Sherlock Holmes. Sudden, obsessed, more like. First these cursed machines. He gestured towards the automated hall, the sound momentarily swelling. Then he starts tinkering with them phonographs. Strange business. Talking about modifications, adjustments. Spent hours locked away with them, answered factory worker. My interest quickened. The phonograph again. Holmes leaned forward slightly, his eyes alight with that familiar keenness, his attention absolute despite the surrounding industrial sounds. Modifications, you say? Did he speak of their purpose? Sherlock Holmes responded. Nay, kept it close, he did. Said it was the future, like these blasted looms. More likely another way to cheat honest folk out of their rightful work, responded factory worker. Before Holmes could press further, a new voice interjected. It was clear and strong, drawing all eyes. A woman stepped forward from the edge of the group. She possessed a commanding presence, her gaze direct, though her attire was as plain as the others. Her footsteps made barely a sound on the dusty floor. Her tone was steady, possessing a clarity that sliced through the background din. Mr. Croft cared little for the future of his workers, gentlemen, only for the future of his profits and his peculiar inventions. If you seek understanding, look to the consequences of his ambition, not the justifications, remarked Clara Winters. The workers nodded, looking to her with a respect that marked her as a figure of influence among them. This, I surmised, must be Clara Winters, the leader Inspector Hardcastle had mentioned. Miss Winters, I presume. Your perspective is valuable. Tell me, this focus on phonographs, was it merely a hobby or something more? Declared Sherlock Holmes. She met his gaze unflinchingly, her voice unwavering against the factory's hum. Mr. Croft's hobbies always served his business. He spoke of capturing voices, perfecting them. Some said he wanted records of his instructions, flawless and unchanging, to replace even his managers. Another way to discard people like worn-out cogs, Clara Winters replied. Holmes straightened up, his expression thoughtful. He surveyed the idle machinery, the discontented faces, the distant, relentless clatter of the automated section. The pieces were beginning to align in his mind, I could tell. Capturing voices, perfecting them, modifications. The words were a low murmur, almost lost beneath the factory's pulse. Then, turning to me, his voice regained its usual briskness. Observe, Watson. The resentment here is palpable, a direct consequence of Croft's relentless automation. But this parallel obsession with modifying phonographic technology suggests something beyond mere industrial efficiency. Sherlock Holmes noted. You mean connected to the recording found beside him, commented Dr. John Watson. He nodded sharply, a decisive sound. Precisely. A confession delivered via phonograph, by a man simultaneously exploring the means to alter or even replicate recorded sound. It implies a capability, a technical knowledge we must investigate further. Our next stop, Watson, must be with someone who understands the very science of these spectral voices, declared Sherlock Holmes. He thanked Miss Winters and the workers, his mind clearly already racing ahead, leaving the relentless clatter and simmering discontent of the factory behind. as we stepped back out into the comparatively quiet grey of the East End afternoon, the mystery deepening with every revelation. Following our inquiries in the grimier environs of the East End, Holmes secured an interview with Professor Augustus Fleming, a man whose name had surfaced in connection with advanced phonographic research. We found ourselves, therefore, ascending the narrow staircase of a respectable but somewhat secluded building near the University District. As we ascended, the air thickened with the sharp scent of ozone and chemicals. A low, intermittent hum grew louder, seeming to pulse behind the door. Holmes rapped sharply, the sound echoing in the narrow stairwell. The door opened to reveal a man of middle years, bespectacled, with ink stains on his fingers and a slightly harassed air. This was Professor Fleming. He ushered us into a room that was less a study and more a laboratory, a chaotic sanctuary of wires, brass mechanisms, glass tubes, and wax cylinders stacked precariously on every available surface. The humming sound was louder here, a persistent thrum accompanied by faint clicks and buzzes, emanating from a complex device involving spinning drums and faintly glowing vacuum tubes on a central workbench. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, please enter. Forgive the disorder. My work tends to expand. You mentioned an interest in the practical applications of reproducing sound," Professor Augustus Fleming said. "Indeed, Professor. Specifically, the fidelity achievable. We are investigating a matter, the unfortunate case of Mr. Silas Croft, where a phonograph recording plays a central and most perplexing role," Sherlock Holmes said. Fleming's expression clouded slightly. He gestured towards the humming apparatus, its various components whirring softly. "Ah, yes, a tragedy. The papers hinted at a recorded confession. My work, well, it pushes the boundaries of what is possible with recorded sound. Not merely capturing it, you understand, but changing it. Editing recordings, altering words, even creating speech that was never spoken," replied Professor Augustus Fleming. "Creating speech, Professor? You mean fabricating a voice?" commented Dr. John Watson. "Precisely, Doctor. My apparatus can analyze a person's speech patterns, cadence, pitch, unique vocal tics. With enough samples, it constructs entirely new sentences. Imagine hearing words never actually spoken, yet delivered in a near-perfect imitation of someone's voice," Professor Augustus Fleming said. He adjusted a dial with a distinct click. A brief snatch of recorded speech, unmistakably Gladstone's familiar oratory, though slightly tinny, issued from a horn speaker before being cut off abruptly. A low whirring and a faint crackle filled the momentary silence. Furthermore, existing recordings can be subtly altered. Pauses removed, words cut out or added so smoothly you wouldn't necessarily notice the change. One can, with sufficient skill and this equipment, make a man appear to say almost anything, answered Professor Augustus Fleming. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with intense interest. The scent of ozone seemed sharper now, mingling with the warm smell of heated vacuum tubes. So smoothly, you say? Could one, for instance, remove the natural hesitations, the drawing of breath, the very markers that betray a statement as authentically spoken rather than recited, remarked Sherlock Holmes. That is theoretically possible, yes. It requires meticulous work, listening and adjusting countless times. But the potential is there. It is this potential, Mr. Holmes, that gives me considerable pause, Professor Augustus Fleming replied. The professor's voice lowered, taking on a tone of distinct unease. He gestured vaguely at his chaotic workshop, the hum of the machine a constant underscore. Imagine the implications. False confessions, counterfeit testimony delivered in court, political speeches twisted, reputations ruined by words never uttered. I intended this for archiving, for preserving history, perhaps for aiding those who have lost their voice, but its capacity for deception is profound, answered Professor Augustus Fleming. Holmes stood up abruptly, his gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond the cluttered workbench. The low thrum of the machine seemed to deepen, underscoring the gravity of Fleming's words. Profound indeed, Professor. You spoke of requiring sufficient voice samples to create speech, and skill to edit smoothly. Tell me, this Croft recording, Inspector Hardcastle described it as remarkably clear, yet possessing a certain unnatural fluency, almost as if the speaker never paused for thought or breath, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Fleming paled slightly, the whirring from his machine suddenly sounding louder in the charged silence as he understood the direction of Holmes' thoughts. I cannot comment on a specific case, Mr. Holmes, but such characteristics, they align with the possibilities, the dreadful possibilities afforded by this technology if wielded by someone with both access to the machine and someone skilled enough to provide the foundational voice imitation, answered Professor Augustus Fleming. Holmes gave a curt nod, his mind clearly racing ahead. The need for not just the machine, but the mimic had suddenly become sharply defined. Our visit to the conflicted professor had yielded more than just technical insight. It had illuminated the human element essential to such devilry. A chill November fog enveloped London as we returned to Baker Street, muffling the usual clatter of hansoms to a low rumble against rain-slicked cobblestones. Within, the cheerful crackle of the fire in our hearth offered scant comfort against the unsettling implications of Professor Fleming's revelations. The sheer potential of his audio apparatus, the ability to capture, dissect, and even synthesize the human voice, cast a disturbing new light upon the death of Silas Croft. Holmes had remained largely silent during our journey back, his brow furrowed in concentration. Now, however, he sprang from his armchair, his tall, gaunt figure casting long, dancing shadows in the flickering gaslight. He began to pace before the fireplace, his slippered feet making barely a sound on the familiar rug. His voice, when he finally spoke, was sharp, cutting through the relative quiet of the room. Fleming's engine, Watson. It is ingenious, yes, but it presents a fascinating paradox in this Croft affair, replied Sherlock Holmes. A paradox, Holmes. It seemed to me to offer a potential explanation. Could not such a device have been used to fabricate that damning confession? Dr. John Watson commented. Precisely. It provides the means, but consider the material. Fleming stressed its complexity. To synthesize a voice convincingly requires extensive samples. To edit seamlessly demands immense skill. But Watson, to create a wholly convincing performance, a confession laced with guilt and despair, that requires more than machinery, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He stopped his pacing and fixed me with that intense gaze that always preceded a significant deduction. The hiss of the gas jet above seemed to punctuate the silence. Think back, Watson. The phonograph cylinder contained not merely Croft's voice, but Croft's voice delivering a specific, emotionally charged narrative. Fleming's device could replicate the tone, perhaps, stitch together words. But the nuance, the cadence of a man confessing his ruin, that suggests artistry, Sherlock Holmes noted. Artistry, you mean? Commented Dr. John Watson. He nodded curtly. I mean mimicry, Watson, highly skilled vocal mimicry. Fleming's technology provides the canvas and the palette, but a human hand, or rather a human voice, must wield the brush, Sherlock Holmes said. A mimic. Good heavens, Holmes, Dr. John Watson said. Indeed. Someone capable of imitating Croft closely enough to provide the raw material for synthesis, or perhaps talented enough to deliver the entire performance, which was then subtly enhanced or merely recorded using advanced techniques, remarked Sherlock Holmes. My mind immediately flew to the various individuals involved. Finch, the protege, Hardcastle, the inspector, Fleming himself. None seemed likely candidates for accomplished mimicry. Who then, I murmured, asked Dr. John Watson. His eyes gleamed. Consider the players, Watson. Consider the motives. Croft's automation displaced hundreds. Who represents those workers? Who possesses the public presence, the charisma, the force of personality to rally them? Replied Sherlock Holmes. You mean Miss Clara Winters, the woman who led the protest? But Holmes, surely, remarked Dr. John Watson. She has the motive, vengeance, or justice for her people. She has the public stage. Such figures often cultivate vocal control. Sherlock Holmes said. He gestured emphatically, his eyes alight with the chase. We know nothing of her past, her skills beyond rabble-rousing. What if that charisma extends to vocal impersonation? It is a known tool in the performer's repertoire, stated Sherlock Holmes. The idea was startling, yet it possessed a chilling logic. A skilled mimic, working with someone who could access and operate Fleming's technology. It formed a cohesive, albeit sinister, picture. We require more information, Holmes stated decisively, his energy renewed. Our immediate task is clear. We must delve into the background of Miss Clara Winters. Discreetly, Watson. We must ascertain if her past holds any connection to the theater, to performance, to any training that might encompass the art of vocal mimicry. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He turned towards his chair again. The hunt truly joined. The fire sputtered, casting flickering light on his aquiline features. The puzzle had gained a crucial human dimension, and the identity of the spectral voice seemed suddenly, tantalizingly closer. Following Holmes's swift decision to delve into the background of Miss Clara Winters, our inquiries were briefly diverted by an urgent summons. A telegram arrived bearing the official crest of Scotland Yard, requesting our immediate presence. As our hansom clattered through bustling streets, the thinning fog revealed the imposing grey facade of Scotland Yard looming before us. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ink, damp wool, and the low, insistent murmur of officialdom, punctuated by the distant clatter of a typewriter and the echo of footsteps on stone floors. We were shown not to the familiar office of Lestrade, but to a smaller, tidier room where Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle awaited us, a sheaf of papers spread neatly upon her desk. Her greeting was brisk, her voice clear and devoid of preamble. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for coming so promptly. Developments have arisen which I believe pertain directly to your investigation into the unfortunate death of Mr. Croft. Inspector Hardcastle said. Holmes inclined his head, his eyes already scanning the documents on her desk. Pray continue, Inspector. Time is, as ever, of the essence, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Inspector Hardcastle nodded, tapping a particular report with a slender finger, the crisp rustle of the paper cutting through the quiet. The steady tick of a large clock on the wall seemed to underscore the gravity of her words. We have received consolidated intelligence regarding a recent spate of burglaries, targeting workshops and suppliers specializing in advanced electrical and acoustic components. The pattern is specific. Vacuum tubes of a certain manufacture, specialized magnetic wire spools, precision diaphragms, items not typically attractive to the common thief. Inspector Hardcastle answered. Holmes leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued. Specific, you say, explained Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's eyes narrowed. And the perpetrators, Sherlock Holmes said. She met his gaze directly. The methods bear the hallmarks of the Clockwork Gang. They are known for their technical proficiency in bypassing security systems, often employed for industrial theft. What is unusual here is the nature of the goods. They align remarkably closely, Mr. Holmes, with the component lists found amongst Professor Fleming's research papers. The very technology potentially capable of sophisticated audio manipulation, responded Inspector Hardcastle. A silence fell, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the clock and the distant sound of boots pacing in the corridor outside. Holmes steepled his fingers, his expression thoughtful. The Clockwork Gang. Yes, their work is neat, almost surgical, but they are typically thieves for hire, procuring items to order. They lack the scientific acumen to conceptualize the use of such components themselves. Someone else is directing them, someone with knowledge, observed Sherlock Holmes. Her voice lowered slightly, taking on a more confidential tone. That is precisely our line of thinking. And there is something else. It is preliminary, you understand, mere whispers from informants, but the name Edgar Finch has surfaced in connection with certain underworld figures known to broker technically complex acquisitions. Nothing concrete, mind you, just a tangential association from some years past. Inspector Hardcastle said. "Finch, Croft's own assistant," remarked Dr. John Watson. Though subtly delivered, the implication hung heavy in the air. Finch, the protege, the discoverer of the body, potentially linked, however tenuously, to those who could procure the very technology needed to fake his benefactor's confession. Holmes sprang to his feet, his sudden movement electrifying the small office. "Precisely, Inspector, it fits," remarked Sherlock Holmes. He began to pace, words tumbling out rapidly. "The gang doesn't pilfer at random. No, they target specific components that require insider knowledge," remarked Sherlock Holmes. He paused, fixing Hardcastle with an intense gaze. "Someone who grasps the technology's true potential to create, perhaps, a spectral voice on a phonograph cylinder," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Another quick turn. "The gang merely provides the means. Their true client, someone with far more nefarious designs, impersonation, fabricated evidence. The possibilities are disturbing," Sherlock Holmes responded. He stopped before the window, looking out at the grey London sky. "Your intelligence regarding Mr. Finch, however slight, provides the first potential thread linking the technical means, these stolen components, to the Croft affair itself," Sherlock Holmes noted. "While proof is lacking, the hypothesis becomes clearer. The technology was stolen to order, likely for someone involved in Croft's demise," declared Sherlock Holmes. "So, the confession cylinder," I began, remarked Dr. John Watson. He turned back, his eyes gleaming with renewed purpose. "Is now more suspect than ever, Watson. It is the very linchpin of this technological deception. Inspector, I am indebted to you. Your information clarifies the landscape considerably. Our next step must be a rigorous examination of that cylinder. We must dissect the phantom voice itself," remarked Sherlock Holmes. The meeting concluded, the ticking clock seeming louder now in the charged silence. Holmes was filled with anticipation. The path ahead led back to Baker Street, back to the laboratory bench, and to the crucial task of uncovering the secrets held within the grooves of that damnable phonograph record. The fog lay thick upon Baker Street that evening, muffling the usual clamor of the city to a low, persistent drone. Within our rooms, however, the atmosphere crackled with a different sort of energy. Holmes, having received the fateful phonograph cylinder from Inspector Hardcastle, had transformed our sitting room into a makeshift laboratory. Wires snaked across the table, connecting the phonograph to various peculiar-looking resonators and amplifying bells of his own devising. The air hummed faintly with the scent of ozone and warm metal. He had been hunched over the apparatus for hours, his brow furrowed in concentration, the silence broken only by the occasional click of a switch or the soft whir of the cylinder mechanism. His voice, when he finally spoke, was sharp, cutting through my quiet reading. "Watson, your ears. I require your unadulterated impression," Sherlock Holmes said. I put down my paper and drew my chair closer. He gestured towards the polished horn of the phonograph. The wax cylinder, a pale, unassuming object, held center stage amidst the clutter of scientific paraphernalia. "Attend closely," he commanded, his tone devoid of preamble. With a soft click, he engaged the mechanism. A faint hiss emerged, followed by the recorded voice, unmistakably that of Silas Croft, or so it seemed. The words were laden with despair, a confession of embezzlement and ruin that chilled me despite the mechanical reproduction. It spoke of figures, disgrace, and the finality of his decision. The effect was profoundly unsettling, the disembodied voice filling the room with a phantom grief. He stopped the machine abruptly, the sudden silence almost as jarring as the voice itself. "Well, Watson, what did you perceive?" remarked Sherlock Holmes. "Good heavens, Holmes," I stammered, somewhat shaken. "It sounds authentic. A terrible confession. The poor fellow." Dr. John Watson said. Holmes offered a thin smile, adjusting a delicate diaphragm connected by a tube to the phonograph's reproducer. He positioned an earpiece, akin to a physician's stethoscope, towards me. "Authenticity has its own signature, Watson, as does artifice. Listen again precisely here." He replayed a short phrase, the words, "utter financial ruin." Do you detect it? Beneath the despair in the voice, there's a subtle, unnatural resonance on the word ruin. It's a faint ringing, Watson, almost like tapping a thin piece of metal, a sound that doesn't belong to a human voice in a simple room, remarked Sherlock Holmes. I listened intently, straining my ears. He played it once more. This time, guided by his observation and the analogy, I thought I could discern that faint, unnatural quality, a ghost note, a metallic tinge that did not belong to the timbre of human speech. That unnatural ring, Watson, is not the acoustic of Croft's study, nor indeed of any normal room. It is the signature of electronic amplification, imperfectly applied, a ghost in the machine betraying the forgery. Now, listen even more closely to the silence between the words. He moved the needle slightly. The background noise, the inherent hiss of the wax cylinder itself. It changes subtly, doesn't it? Just after ruin, and before the next phrase begins. That slight shift in texture reveals an edit, a point where separate recordings were joined. Clumsy when you know how to listen, remarked Sherlock Holmes. He demonstrated again, isolating the faint background whisper between phrases. Indeed, guided by his explanation, I could now perceive a minute but distinct change in its texture, like two pieces of slightly different velvet stitched together. The seam was almost imperceptible, yet undeniably present once pointed out. "These are the acoustic fingerprints of the forger," he declared, leaning back, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of discovery. "Tiny imperfections, artifacts of the process. This recording is a masterful fake, Watson, constructed with technology far beyond mere mimicry. It required the advanced principles stolen from Professor Fleming, wielded by a skilled hand," observed Sherlock Holmes. The implications settled heavily in the quiet room, broken only by the faint ticking of the mantel clock. The confession, the very basis of the suicide verdict, was a fabrication, a sophisticated piece of technological theater. The Clockwork Gang supplied the tools, stolen to order, no doubt. But who commissioned the work? Who possessed the technical acumen to direct such a complex deception? His gaze grew distant, calculating. Our attention must turn again to the man who found this cylinder, the man steeped in audio science and Croft's ambitious protege, Mr. Edgar Finch. The gaslight hissed softly. Outside, the distant rumble of a late-night omnibus faded, leaving only the profound implications of Holmes's dissection. The phantom voice had yielded its secret, pointing not to a guilty conscience, but towards a calculating mind, yet hidden in the shadows. Our next conversation with Mr. Finch promised to be most illuminating. Following Holmes's remarkable dissection of the spectral confession, which proved beyond doubt the artifice employed, our attention turned once more towards the living players in this grim drama. The analysis of the phonograph cylinder, with its telltale imperfections laid bare by Holmes's keen ear and instruments, had shifted the ground beneath our feet. Suicide seemed increasingly improbable. Murder, cunningly disguised, now loomed large. Thus, it was with a renewed sense of purpose that we found ourselves, the very next afternoon, ascending the imposing stone steps of Croft Industries. the air thick with the cloying scent of machine oil and the distant, rhythmic thudding from the factory works beyond. We were shown directly into the late Mr. Croft's expansive office, a room now occupied, both physically and atmospherically, by his protege, Mr. Edgar Finch. He sat behind the great mahogany desk, papers spread before him, a picture of focused industry. The heavy ticking of an ornate mantel clock seemed to mark the seconds with undue gravity. Finch rose smoothly upon our entrance, his greeting polite, yet imbued with a certain restless energy. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, please do be seated. I trust Inspector Hardcastle has kept you appraised," said Mr. Edgar Finch. "Indeed, Mr. Finch. We have examined the recording. Most instructive. It raises certain questions regarding the technical feasibility of such a device," observed Sherlock Holmes. Finch leaned back slightly, his fingers steepled. A faint whirring sound could be discerned from somewhere beyond the office walls, perhaps a ventilation system, part of the very automation he championed. Ah, the phonograph. A tragedy indeed, made worse by such a morbid artifact. Mr. Croft was captivated by Professor Fleming's work. My own expertise, however, is rather more hands-on. Voice reproduction, resonance capture, acoustic shaping. The possibilities are truly revolutionary, Mr. Edgar Finch answered. Holmes watched him intently, his eyes narrowed. "Practical knowledge, you say? Tell me, Mr. Finch, are you familiar with the challenges of eliminating harmonic distortions when splicing recorded vocal fragments, or the techniques required to artificially induce the specific timbre of, say, emotional distress?" Sherlock Holmes said. Without missing a beat, Finch dove into a sea of technical jargon. Though much of it sailed over my head, I caught Holmes' sharp glance. This was no surface-level knowledge. Finch spoke of concepts Holmes had linked directly to Fleming's purloined research, the very techniques that had exposed the cylinder as fraudulent. For a mere protege, Finch's expertise seemed suspiciously comprehensive. One must account for the glottal stop variations, naturally, and the inherent frequency decay in replicated sibilants. "It requires precise calibration," said Mr. Edgar Finch. He spoke with absolute confidence, the technical terms rolling off his tongue as if discussing commonalities. Professor Fleming excelled at the theory, of course, though his approach often lacked practical application. "Croft Industries, under the right guidance," replied Mr. Edgar Finch. His eyes shone with an almost evangelical fervor as he continued, "could revolutionize communication, efficiency. Imagine factories run with perfect synchronicity, orders conveyed instantaneously, human error eliminated," responded Mr. Edgar Finch. His enthusiasm for automation was palpable, bordering on obsessive. He spoke of Croft's reluctance to fully embrace the future, hinting at disagreements, at a vision stifled. The ambition to seize control and implement his own technological dream was no longer merely suggested. It was painted in bold strokes. A bold vision, Mr. Finch. Such advancements require significant resources, careful planning, and precise timing. Your own schedule must be demanding, coordinating such progress. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. For the first time, a flicker of something, caution, crossed Finch's face. He tapped a silver pen rhythmically against the desk blotter, the sharp clicks punctuating the silence left by the cessation of his technical discourse. "Progress waits for no man, Mr. Holmes. One must seize opportunities. As for timing, well, certain arrangements were already in motion, naturally. Contingencies discussed only last Tuesday, in fact," answered Mr. Edgar Finch. Holmes made no outward sign, but I noted the slight tightening of his lips. Last Tuesday. A curious detail. Croft was alive then. What contingencies required such recent discussion? Was it a slip, Watson, or a coded reference to unseen allies? Thank you for your time, Mr. Finch. Your technical insights have been most illuminating. Progress, as you say, is a powerful force. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. As we descended the stairs, the rhythmic clang of machinery seemed louder, more insistent. Outside, the London air felt heavy. His ambition is plain, Holmes, and his knowledge of that infernal machine, Dr. John Watson said. Indeed, Watson. Finch possesses the knowledge, the ambition, and potentially the motive. Yet that reference to last Tuesday's contingencies, it suggests orchestration, perhaps external pressure or partnership. He champions automation, displacing workers who now simmer with resentment. It is amongst those very workers, I suspect, that we may find the other end of this technological thread, deduced Sherlock Holmes. He hailed a passing hansom, his gaze distant, already formulating the next step in our investigation. A step that would lead us away from the polished offices of industry and into the shadowed gatherings of the dispossessed. The fog lay thick and yellow upon the East End streets, muffling the usual cacophony of carts and cries to a low, persistent hum that seemed to pulse with the city's heartbeat. Guided by Holmes's discreet inquiries and a certain aptitude for blending into the shadows we had cultivated over years, we found ourselves ascending a narrow, rickety staircase above a disused tannery, each step groaning under our weight. The air hung heavy with the ghostly scent of cured leather and damp decay, punctuated by the steady, echoing drip of water somewhere unseen. We had shed our usual attire for the rougher garb of dock workers, a disguise deemed necessary for the clandestine gathering we sought to infiltrate. A low murmur of voices grew louder as we reached the landing, filtering from beneath a heavy wooden door, along with the stale warmth of crowded bodies. Holmes pressed a finger to his lips, then eased the door open a mere crack, the hinges emitting a faint squeal quickly lost in the growing sound from within. We slipped inside, melting into the deep shadows at the back of a large, dimly lit loft. Perhaps 50 or 60 men and women were crammed into the space, their restless shuffling and occasional coughs mingling with the low murmur. Their faces, etched with hardship and resentment, were illuminated by a few gas lamps that hissed and sputtered, casting long, dancing shadows. Standing upon a makeshift platform of crates was the woman Holmes suspected, Clara Winters. Even in the gloom, her presence commanded attention, silencing the shuffling sounds near the front. She possessed a fiery energy, her voice, when she began to speak, cutting through the low hum of the room. Her gestures were sharp and decisive as she addressed the assembly. The crowd hung on her every word, their earlier murmurs replaced by a tense silence, punctuated only by the hiss of the lamps and occasional, guttural growls of agreement. And Croft, bless his philanthropic soul, her voice dripped with sarcasm that drew harsh laughter, told us automation was progress. Progress for whom? For his coffers, for the shareholders, not for the families turfed out onto the cobbles, not for the hands that built his empire, responded Clara Winters. Her natural speaking voice was rich and resonant, filling the loft. But then, to illustrate a point, she shifted. The change was audible before it was truly visible, a subtle clearing of the throat, and then her voice altered pitch and cadence with startling accuracy. "My dear fellow," she mimicked, adopting the clipped, superior tones of a factory foreman we recognized from Croft's mill. "The machinery requires no wages, no tea breaks, no sick days. It is the future. Future indeed. A future where we starve." A wave of angry shouts erupted from the crowd, echoing harshly in the confined space. I glanced at Holmes. Even in the dim light, his intense focus was palpable. His attention was fixed not only on Winters, but also on a peculiar apparatus tucked away near her platform, a compact electrical device, humming faintly, with wires leading discreetly away. Its construction seemed unusually advanced, reminding me of whispers concerning the Clockwork Gang's access to sophisticated technology, perhaps even the work of an expert like Finch. "Observe, Watson," Holmes whispered, his voice barely audible above the crowd's murmur. "This is not merely a gathering of the dispossessed. Note the equipment beside her. You hear that low electrical hum, far too sophisticated for mere amplification, perhaps even experimental. Its design hints at Finch's known ingenuity. And listen closely to their chants when they respond. The phrasing is almost coded. The gears must turn, the spring is wound. Distinct echoes of the Clockwork Gang's parlance, wouldn't you agree? Finch provides the technical means, the gang provides the network and muscle, and Winters provides the voice. Someone is orchestrating this carefully, declared Sherlock Holmes. My attention followed his direction. The device indeed hummed faintly, a persistent, low electrical thrum beneath the passionate human noise of the crowd. He was right. The coordination, the way the crowd responded in unison to certain phrases, felt deeper than simple shared grievance, strongly suggesting the organized hand of the Clockwork Gang. Winter's voice rose again, powerful and clear, momentarily drowning out even the persistent electrical hum. They think they can silence us with their machines, replace our voices with clockwork, but our spirit, our unity, that they cannot replicate. The irony struck me sharply, given our suspicions about the spectral voice on Croft's phonograph. Sensing the meeting might soon disperse, and the risk of discovery growing with every passing moment, Holmes gave a slight, almost imperceptible nudge. We slipped back towards the door, our soft footsteps masked by the ongoing fervor, the sounds of the impassioned crowd, the chanting, the shouts. Winter's resonant voice began to fade behind us, replaced once more by the protesting creak of the stairs underfoot and the damp chill of the East End night air filtering up from below. Once clear of the immediate vicinity, breathing the foggy air that seemed cleaner despite the pervasive grime, Holmes quickened his pace, his boot heels clicking more rapidly on the damp cobblestones. Miss Winters possesses the vocal talent beyond doubt, he stated, his tone clipped and decisive. And her access to that specific technology and the coded language confirms the external influence we suspected. An alliance, Watson, just as we theorized. Finch provides the technical knowledge and motive of ambition. Winters provides the voice and the righteous anger of the displaced workers, perhaps manipulated by the promise of revenge or restitution. The Clockwork Gang facilitates, benefiting from the chaos and undoubtedly interested in Finch's advancements. Sherlock Holmes noted. But how to prove such a complex conspiracy, Holmes? Especially the phonograph deception, commented Dr. John Watson. Proof requires bringing the elements together, he replied, raising his hand as the distinct clatter of hooves and rumble of wheels announced a hansom emerging from the swirling fog like a phantom vessel. We have the players, the motives, the means. Now, we must set the stage for the final act. Croft study, Watson. The scene of the original crime shall also be the scene of its unraveling. Sherlock Holmes noted. His words hung in the air, heavy with anticipation. With a snap of the reins and the slam of the cab door, the hansom rattled away into the night, its sounds quickly swallowed by the fog, leaving the secrets of the East End shrouded once more in mist. The oppressive silence of Mr. Silas Croft's study seemed heavier than the thick velvet curtains drawn against the Kensington night. Outside, the occasional rumble of a late carriage on the wet pavement served only to accentuate the stillness within, punctuated solely by the faint hiss of the gaslight. Holmes stood near the hearth, his silhouette sharp against the low light, the very picture of coiled energy. I occupied a chair shrouded in shadow, my service revolver cold and heavy in my coat pocket. Positioned centrally, upon the deceased industrialist's heavy mahogany desk, sat the phonograph, the instrument of deception, now poised as bait. Beside me, unseen in the gloom, Inspector Hardcastle waited with a patience equal to Holmes, his presence marked only by the occasional, barely audible breath. We had been positioned for the better part of an hour, the only sound the solemn ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each beat marking time towards the anticipated climax. Patience, Watson. The mechanism of greed and revenge, once set in motion, rarely deviates from its intended path. They believe the apparatus secured, the deception complete. "They will come," declared Sherlock Holmes. As if summoned by his words, a faint scraping sound emanated from the French windows leading to the garden. It was barely audible, the noise of metal easing against wood. Holmes shifted slightly, a subtle indication he had registered it. Inspector Hardcastle drew a quiet, preparatory breath. Moments later, the latch clicked softly, and the window eased inwards, admitting a cold draft carrying the sharp scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. 3 figures slipped into the room, their soft, deliberate footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, accompanied by the faint rustle of their clothing. In the dim light, I recognized the sharp features of Edgar Finch, followed closely by the determined profile of Clara Winters. Behind them lingered 2 burly men whose rough appearance spoke plainly of the Clockwork Gang. Finch moved directly towards the desk, his hand reaching for the phonograph. An interesting nocturnal errand, Mr. Finch. Retrieving incriminating evidence, perhaps. Simultaneously, with a sharp click, Inspector Hardcastle activated a hidden electric lamp, flooding the desk area with harsh light. Finch recoiled with a sharp intake of breath, shielding his eyes. Winters spun around, her face a mask of fury, while the 2 thugs tensed, the menacing rustle as their hands darted inside their coats, betraying their alarm. From the hallway, the unmistakable heavy tread of Hardcastle's constables signaled their arrival. "Stay precisely where you are surrounded," responded Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. "Holmes, Inspector, what is the meaning of this intrusion?" responded Edgar Finch. Holmes ignored him, his gaze sweeping over the group. "The meaning, Mr. Finch," he said, his voice low and measured, "is the unraveling of your plot. A scheme born of ambition, amplified by Miss Winters' talent for mimicry, and executed by the Clockwork Gang," Sherlock Holmes said. He gestured towards the phonograph, the polished wood gleaming under the electric light. "You, Mr. Finch, possess the technical knowledge and the access. Seeing your mentor Croft as an obstacle to your control and vision for automated industry, you conceived a plan to remove him, framing it as a suicide driven by guilt over fabricated embezzlement. But you required a perfect vocal imitation, a spectral voice to confess on this cylinder," stated Sherlock Holmes, his eyes fixed on Clara Winters, whose expression hardened under his scrutiny. "And who better than Miss Winters, a woman whose livelihood was threatened by Croft's automation, a leader of the displaced, possessed of a remarkable, stage-honed gift for vocal impersonation, a gift I myself witnessed at her clandestine gatherings," Sherlock Holmes noted. Winters flinched as if struck, her eyes blazing, but she remained silent, defiant. "You identified her, Finch, seeing her potential not just for the voice, but for her genuine motive, making the deception all the more potent. Revenge for her people, she might believe. Opportunity for control, you knew," Sherlock Holmes responded. He indicated the 2 thugs, who shifted uneasily, their brutish confidence visibly evaporating under Holmes's dissecting gaze. But the technical feat required more than just mimicry. It required specific components, perhaps modifications derived from Professor Fleming's stolen research technology the Clockwork Gang specializes in acquiring, Sherlock Holmes noted. The 2 thugs exchanged uneasy glances, but said nothing, trapped between Holmes's logic and the constables at the door. "You needed them, Finch, not just for the theft of necessary parts, but for the muscle to ensure silence and compliance. A tripartite alliance founded on distinct, yet interlocking, desires. Finch sought Croft's empire and wealth. Winters sought retribution, a form of twisted justice. The gang sought profit and access to potentially weaponizable audio technology. A neat, if nefarious, confluence of interests," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. "He destroyed lives. He deserved," responded Clara Winters. He deserved the due process of law, madam, not murder orchestrated through technological deceit. Your quest for justice became entangled with naked ambition and criminal enterprise," replied Sherlock Holmes. The constables moved forward, surrounding the conspirators. Finch stood frozen, his face ashen. Winters remained defiant as handcuffs clicked shut. The gang members, their bravado gone, offered no resistance. In the sudden silence, the trap had sprung, the spectral voice forever silenced. The stark, gas-lit corridors of Scotland Yard rang not just with the measured tread of constables' boots, but with the low, urgent murmur of official business and the distant clang of a closing cell door. Before us, under the watchful eye of Inspector Hardcastle, stood the architects of the spectral voice deception. Edgar Finch, his youthful ambition now curdled into a sullen resentment, averted his gaze. Clara Winters, however, met our scrutiny head-on, a flicker of her stage presence still discernible beneath the pallor of defeat. Nearby, several rough-looking individuals, identified members of the notorious Clockwork Gang, were being formally charged, their sullen silence punctuated only by the scrape of heavy boots on the cold stone floor and the occasional muttered curse. "Securely held, Mr. Holmes. Make no mistake. The Yard is indebted to you for untangling this intricate affair," Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle replied. "Justice requires clarity above all, Inspector. The complexity lay not merely in the crime, but in the confluence of disparate motives," declared Sherlock Holmes. Later, ensconced once more in the familiar comfort of our Baker Street lodgings, the fog pressing thick against the window panes and the fire casting dancing shadows, Holmes elaborated. A hansom cab rattled distantly on the street below, its sound muffled by the fog, while the rhythmic tick-tock of the mantel clock marked the passing moments. Inspector Hardcastle had joined us, seeking a final distillation of the affair. The phonograph, yes, but the how of it, Mr. Holmes. The sheer gall required to manufacture a man's voice so convincingly, said Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. Indeed, Professor Fleming's research, stolen by the gang and weaponized by Finch, was the key. Imagine, Watson, he continued, leaning forward, his eyes bright, capturing not just sound, but the essence of a voice, its unique pitch, rhythm, resonance signature. Once this vocal fingerprint was secured, likely from Croft's own dictation cylinders, Finch could impress new words onto it, much like a sculptor molding clay. Miss Winters, with her theatrical gift for mimicry, provided the necessary cadence and emotion for the false confession. Finch then technologically imprinted this performance onto the blank cylinder using Fleming's apparatus. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He paused, the ticking of the mantel clock marking the moment. The simplicity of the core principle hung in the air, chilling in its ingenuity. So the confession was a performance, given technological flesh by Finch's machine, Dr. John Watson inquired. Precisely. A tripartite alliance, each member indispensable. Finch craved Croft's empire and possessed the technical skill. Winters sought vengeance for the displaced workers, her past providing the vocal artistry. The Clockwork Gang desired profit and access to Fleming's potentially lucrative and dangerous technology. They provided the stolen research and the necessary intimidation. Finch supplied the technical means, Winters the vocal performance, the gang the stolen research, and the threat of force. A truly modern conspiracy, Watson, twisting the tools of progress towards ruin, Sherlock Holmes said. A grim reminder, Mr. Holmes, that progress casts long shadows. This technology, in the wrong hands, Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle answered. She left the thought unfinished, the weight of it hanging in the Baker Street air, mingling with the scent of pipe tobacco and the soft sigh of the embers in the hearth. Indeed, Inspector, the echoes of this case will resonate far beyond the walls of Newgate Prison. It raises questions not merely of guilt, but of the very path upon which we tread, observed Sherlock Holmes. His words, heavy with unspoken meaning, seemed to linger as the mantel clock chimed the late hour, each strike clear in the stillness. The spectral voice had been silenced, but the implications of its creation were only just beginning to be understood, promising further reflection on the complex relationship between human ingenuity and human fallibility. The affair of the spectral voice had drawn to its close, leaving behind a residue of unease that even the crackling fire in our Baker Street hearth could not entirely dispel. Outside, a persistent November rain lashed against the window panes, blurring the familiar gaslights of the street below into hazy constellations. Inspector Hardcastle sat opposite Holmes, her usual brisk efficiency tempered by a thoughtful silence, while my friend reclined in his armchair, fingertips pressed together, eyes fixed upon the dancing flames. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was steady but carried a new weight. This case, Mr. Holmes, it marks a rather unsettling milestone. The phonograph used not merely as a tool for entertainment, but as an instrument of elaborate deception, even murder by proxy. It presents Scotland Yard with challenges we are ill-prepared to meet, responded Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. Holmes shifted slightly, drawing a long breath. Indeed, Inspector, explained Sherlock Holmes. Holmes paused, his gaze distant. Every advance in human ingenuity brings with it the shadow of its misuse. Professor Fleming's invention, capable of capturing and replicating the human voice with such fidelity, is a marvel, stated Sherlock Holmes. He leaned forward, his tone darkening. Yet in the hands of a man like Finch, driven by avarice and thwarted ambition, or exploited by the desperation of Miss Winters and the calculated strategy of the Clockwork Gang, it becomes a formidable weapon. Sherlock Holmes said, "Consider Croft himself," he continued, his tone crisp and analytical. A man who built his fortune on innovation, displacing workers with his automated systems. Is it not a grim irony that he was ultimately undone by a perversion of the very progress he championed? Technology, you see, is a mirror. It reflects the capacity for creation, but also for destruction. It is a sobering thought, I interjected, the memory of that chilling, disembodied confession still vivid. To think that the very sound of a man's voice, the essence of his identity, could be so convincingly forged. Where does truth lie when our own senses can be so easily deceived? Dr. John Watson inquired. Precisely, Doctor, Hardcastle concurred, her gaze meeting mine. It demands new methods, new vigilance. Forensic science must evolve alongside the criminal mind. We must learn to listen not just to what is said, but how it is said and by what means, said Inspector Evelyn Hardcastle. A silence fell, heavy with contemplation. The rhythmic drumming of rain against the window panes and the soft hiss of the fire filled the room. Holmes steepled his fingers once more, his piercing gaze fixed on some distant point as he delved into thought. I could almost see the gears of his formidable mind turning, processing the complexities of the case, the intertwining motives, the sheer novelty of the central deception. This case felt distinct, a harbinger perhaps of crimes, yet unimagined in our rapidly changing world. The price of progress, Holmes murmured, almost to himself. Paid sometimes by the displaced, sometimes by the deceived, and always demanding adaptation from those who seek justice, declared Sherlock Holmes. It was then that a resolve formed within me. This case, with its unique reliance on the nascent technology of sound recording, deserved a record beyond my usual handwritten accounts. The nuances, the very auditory nature of the crime, seemed to demand preservation in a similar medium. Gentlemen, Inspector, I announced, perhaps a trifle formally, this adventure has been singular in its reliance upon mechanisms of sound. I have recently acquired a phonograph apparatus myself for experimental purposes, wondered Dr. John Watson. I gestured vaguely towards the corner where the polished wood and gleaming horn of my own machine rested. It seems only fitting that I should attempt to chronicle the intricate details of this particular investigation. The spectral voice, the manipulated confession, the very essence of the deception, using the same technology that lay at its heart. My written word may capture the facts, but perhaps the spoken account will better preserve the atmosphere of this most unusual affair. Dr. John Watson said. Holmes offered a slight, approving nod, while Inspector Hardcastle looked intrigued. As the fire cast long shadows across the familiar room, I felt a sense of purpose. The tale of Silas Croft, Edgar Finch, and the spectral voice would not merely be written. It would be recorded, a testament captured in wax to the strange and challenging paths down which progress could lead us.